Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special one-off podcast talking about Netflix Adolescence with participation people. We noticed that there's a lot of conversation and buzz around the series, and rightfully so, it's great. And while parents and everyone alike is talking about mobile phones and young people, we noticed one big thing. And as always, it's the same thing we keep seeing. This conversation about young people is happening without them. And that's why we're here today. We're firm believers that you can't talk about young people without them. So I have invited one of our young consultants to just talk to us about their opinions on adolescence, the conversation happening around the series, and young male culture and radicalization, and just open up the dialogue a little bit more. My name is Em, the social media coordinator at PP, and I am your host today. And our guest today is none other than, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Hayden. I'm one of our young consultants here at Participation People, and it's my pleasure to be here today.
Thank you so much for coming on with me today. I just think it's going to be such a fun conversation. Or not just fun, but I think very interesting and insightful. But I won't bore us with all of my waffling and rambling, which I have a tendency to do. So let's get into it. Hayden, what were your initial thoughts and feelings about adolescence? Did you like it? Did you not? Tell us everything.
Yeah, so when I first watched it, I binged it all in once, as I'm sure many people did, but it's just the shock that hits you. Not even the shock, because it's the thing that was the worst bit to me was how little I was surprised, because it's nothing anyone hasn't seen before, and it was just the depressing aspects of you could really see this happening to anyone. You could see it happening to any sort of person, any sort of young man who's susceptible to falling down this sort of pipeline, and that's what hit me. It's not the cinematography I did very much appreciate, but it's not any of that. It's not any of the discussion about social media, mobile phones that people are having. It's the fact that it could really happen to anyone, and not even the people you would suspect. I mean, I'm sure to Jamie's parents in the show that he seemed like a very normal child, and that they did elaborate on that point. But I think it was the fact that, I could imagine anyone falling down this pipeline, and that's the scary bit.
It's really fascinating you say that actually, because when I watched it, I wasn't surprised either. I'm on the older scale of Gen Z, and I grew up with this kind of stuff being the norm and growing in popularity. But I see a lot of older people and adults actually being surprised that this could happen. So what would you say to those parents that are surprised? Because you say that it could happen to anyone. Have you experienced stuff like this or seen stuff like this from your own experience?
I mean, I'm lucky in the fact that I take the more boomer approach to social media, which is I won't go on it if I don't have to, which has saved me personally. But I've definitely seen, you overhear conversations or something someone says, and you're just like, you got that straight off social media, and you got that from, I think they're calling it the manosphere of content. And it's depressing to see how easily it sort of festers, because it does fester. And I go to an all boys school, which I think isn't the source of the issue, but amplifies the issue. As it's this sort of like constant battle for proving masculinity into this sort of toxic masculinity. So I think, whilst I haven't experienced it personally, and I find myself quite lucky in that regard, because I don't think it's more luck than pure judgment in some ways, but it's just depressing, if I'm honest.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I really love your use of the word fester because you are absolutely spot on with that. It really does fester. And it's interesting as well, you saying about being in an all boys school and that environment. What would you say then that would that contribute more or less to this issue? This issue of incel culture, the being on the manosphere. You were talking about toxic masculinity and how it's exacerbated, in masculine settings. Or would you say that actually it doesn't really have anything to do with the schools or anything like that?
I think it definitely amplifies it. I mean, I don't. It is not the source of the problem. I don't think single sex, single gender schools are the source of it because I mean the show itself set in a mixed school, so I don't think it's the source. But it definitely does amplify it, as I'm sure that some people who are in that school did not have many female friends, did not make friends with many women before entering the sixth form when it does become mixed, because my school is mixed in sixth form. So now I'm in the mixed environment, which I've noticed has let things settle a bit. But even then, I'm speaking to some of the transferees who are girls who come over from their schools, and they say, my school has this undercurrent of sexism. And it's not anything blatant, it's not like there's specific different treatment, but it's just the subtle ways it sort of seeps into the culture in ways you don't notice until it's pointed out to you. And I do think it doesn't help the fact that these young men in these formative years of their life aren't getting that experience of the other half of the population. I mean, they may do in social settings and they may do outside of school, but school is the formative place for many of them. And if it becomes this echo chamber where the culture is just, man and being masculine, and the important thing I'd like to emphasize here is I don't think the teachers can stop that in that much regard, because my school is actually, I'd say, very proactive on it. They are very big into the sort of inclusivity, big into gender equality, things like that. For being a boys' school, they are quite good in that regard. But the culture that the students fester means they don't actually really pay attention to any of that. Because let's be honest, when you're a kid, if you hear a teacher droning on about something, it doesn't really get to you. So at the underlying root is the culture of the students. And that is what needs to change for anything to happen. And I do think in an all-boys school, it becomes amplified because it's this echo chamber that just continues and continues going downwards until you don't notice it and you're desensitized.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more, actually. Like that drawing back to culture. And I think a lot of issues in this world at their core really is an issue of culture, especially when it comes to diversity and representation. Because, like you say, it's so important to have representation around you when you're in those formative years so you don't get caught up in these echo chambers. And you were saying about schools, they're there and they can exacerbate it with, all boys school, but really, it's almost like a backdrop. It kind of sounds like you were saying, students, they have their own culture and the teachers are there, whether they get listened to or not is another matter. And so where do you think that this culture comes from? Is it just that lack of representation in the formative years, or is it something else, or is it even a combination of so many different things?
Well, I was actually thinking about this because I see a lot of people are pinning the blame on social media, and I'm not denying that social media doesn't play a massive impact, because it does. That the root of the problem is that young kids have access to radical voices that are really pushing these ideologies and end up isolating them from everything else and really zoning in on this, because young men don't really have progressive role models these days, if I'm honest. So it's easy for them to sort of capitalize on this. But I don't think social media is a main issue, and I don't think banning phones or banning social media will help solve anything. One, because if there's nothing else craftier than a group of kids with restricted access to technology, any school IT admin will tell you that for free. And two, because social media does have its benefits, and that gets ignored in the conversation. Like, social media is a route for minorities to find communities online when they may not have access to that, or for people to find information they may not be able to access in person, or things like that. I know it's helped me, I know it's helped many others. So social media, it has its good side, it has its bad side, it's part of the problem, it's not the entire problem. It combines with this sort of cultural setting, which I think comes from two main things. One, the lack of challenging in certain environments, and the unwillingness of many people to sort of actually go, hey, this is wrong. Because I've even been there where you sort of stand, you hear something and you're like, I don't know what to do. I'm a bystander to this, and I don't know how to insert myself and say, hang on a minute, can we go back to that? And secondly, it's the casual sexism people get brought up with, and it depends in the environment in which you grow and the social settings around you, what cultural values you're brought up with, whether your parents are more traditionalist, whether they're more progressive. So it's this sort of mishmash of factors, and for some people, these factors are even conflicting, which makes it worse. But there is one thing that I think often gets ignored by lots of people, which is the fact that young people, at their core, they like to rebel against authority. And it used to be that the authority was this sort of institution of the frail, pale, and stale, as it's called. It was this sort of like set part of society that it was the majority against the minority, and that used to be the top, the unchallenged viewpoint, the status quo, and young people rebelled against that because young people rebel against authority. Now the authority is progressive. They're like, we need to move on, we need to bring in new inclusive values, which is great. I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm saying young people like to rebel against that, and they will listen to the voices that allow them to rebel. So is this combination of everything that means young people are slowly moving away from those progressive ideals towards more traditional, towards more exclusivity, and towards more well, away from diversity and things like that.
I love you saying about rebellion. I remember when I was a teenager and my mum, she was trying to look out for me, bless her, and even little things like, hey, don't play in the road. That's where cars are. And I'm like, well, I agree with you, but you've told me not to do that, so I'm gonna do that. And that's quite a few stories I've heard of similar of actually a lot of young men growing up at the moment, feeling this rebellion against diversity, not because they don't believe in diversity, but literally because at the moment it is so I don't want to say forced down your throat because that's a horrible way of saying it, but it's so reinforced at every opportunity, which is great. But to a young person, you're right, Hayden, they're gonna see that as it's a structure that they're rebelling against. It doesn't matter what it is. We all have that in us to rebel when we're a teenager. It's part of growing up. So it kind of sounds like to me that we've got a mix of things that we can kind of change, social media and culture, and then we've got some things that we can't really change. This rebelliousness of, growing up, that kind of coming of age journey that we all have to go through, whether that's, making silly mistakes like playing in the street. So, what can we do then to not change or stop this behavior in young people? Because don't think that's I think that would be the irony of it, wouldn't it? Is we're going to stop young people rebelling by telling them not to rebel. Um, so we're not going to do that. Throwing that aside, what can we do to at least not like mitigate the problems or just support young people better so when they are rebelling, it's in a more constructive way and in a less toxic or harmful way?
Well, I mean, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? And I don't have $1 million, but I will chuck my 2 cents in, which is that at the end of the day, change, cultural change, is not going to come from the people in power. It's not going to come from the people who are in those authority positions. So the way you are not going to be able to tackle this, despite how much you hear it in the news or however much Keir Starmer wants to say it in PMQs, is not going to be by showing this TV show in schools and having teachers go on spiels. Because that won't solve a single thing, I guarantee you that. It might, it might be a plaster, but it's like putting a plaster on a massive wound. Temporary solution, not going to work in the long run. What you need is young people on your side. So, because at the end of the day, some young people are still going to be the progressive and hold those values. You get those people on your side and you get those people to start working with you, to develop resources, to develop plans, to actually go in and be ambassadors of this change. And it won't work at first, because nothing works at first, but it will work slowly and surely. Again, it's just my 2 cents. There's probably a million different ways to try and solve this problem and a million different ways to fail at it too. But it is a potential solution. And I think at the end of the day, if young people are the problem that is being blamed upon, then young people are also the solution. Because teachers sure aren't, as much as they want to be and as much as I want them to be as well. Some young people, you can't get through to them with teachers.
Well, you know what I'm going to say, because, here at PP, we are a little bit biased towards supporting youth voice and co-producing youth solutions with Gen Z. But in all seriousness, though, you are spot on. Like, there are a million different solutions you can have because this is such a complicated issue, right? It's not just so black and white that it's one thing, this is one solution. There's probably going to be countless solutions, and it's going to take a long, long time. And no change comes from a place of, two sides completely against each other, right? There has to be some communication. And if we continue to disconnect the conversation from young people, then they're going to start having conversations about other things without us. And if we want to have conversations with them that make change, we really do have to start listening to them properly, inviting them in the room, talking to them about a TV show that is about them rather than telling them what they should and shouldn't do. We really do need to open up those spaces, and it is hard and it is uncomfortable. And like you say, Hayden, nothing works straight away, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Um, and it's great that you mentioned schools because that feeds in perfect into my next question. Because they were talking about showing adolescence in schools, and saying it will actually be really helpful for young people. But I noticed when I was watching a lot of those interviews, of different politicians or even the creators saying it should be in schools, I didn't see a single young person talking on the sofa with them. So, what's your opinion?
If you watch something in school, in your little PSHE classroom, you're instantly going to think it's not cool, not worth listening to. And that's not the message we want to send to young people about this show. Because I noticed, because I've actually been talking to my mates about it, I've noticed, comparing it to when they watched it on their own, to when they watched it with their parents, or when they were told to watch it by some authority figure, they were much more receptive to it if they watched it on their own volition. So the moment you show it in a PSHE classroom, the moment a PSHE teacher puts it on, it's all going to go wrong, because young people do not pay attention to those things. I mean, call me an anomaly, I get a kick out of watching those because sometimes they're filmed quite terribly and I find that funny, and sometimes they actually have a useful message. But most young people, the majority, won't give a monkeys. So if you want to show it, if you show it in schools, I think it's all going to go wrong. What you need to do is, as I said, get young people around the table and get them to promote it to their mates and to promote it to their mates. Because if it comes from your peers, then you're less likely to immediately reject it. You're less likely to think, that's uncool, waste of time, I don't care. You're more likely to think, hang on, there's something worth in here. Like, my mate's noticed it, my mate thinks there's something worth it. You know what? I'm slightly more receptive. All you're going to do by bringing schools and authority figures and teachers into the conversation, and I hate to say this because I think they do a brilliant job, and shout out to teachers and all that, but young people are going to tune out, and that's the last thing we want.
And then maybe we should start telling young people not to watch it. Maybe that could work, if lean into the rebelliousness.
Who knows? I mean, teachers are there to be respected, and I respect them, but I can't say the same of all my peers, I'll put it that way.
So I was going to actually say, as you were talking about, it sounds like you respect your peers and you rebel against people older than you and authority figures, but you've kind of just thrown that out of the window. A different.
I'm saying young people respect their peers. I'm not saying I do. We're not a single block. Some of us have different opinions.
Yes, that is very true. We can't fall into that trap of pigeonholing people in boxes. Every young person is different. Hell, Hayden, you're Gen Z, right? Yeah, and I'm Gen Z. And
exactly.
How old are you, Hayden?
Only barely 17.
Yeah, and I'm 28. So we've got...
Wide difference.
Yeah. So we've got, over 10 years difference between us. And that is a massive change that you can experience in a decade. Like completely different media, first of all. I grew up with Pokemon and Digimon. So that's my nostalgia. Hayden's nostalgia is going to be completely different. And likewise, our cultures are going to be completely different. So, yeah, you're right. We shouldn't be putting young people in boxes. And yes, some respect their peers and some don't. Sounds like Hayden doesn't always respect his peers.
I respect my friends, and I don't respect the people who are annoying and act like the incels and the people who are disrespectful to women.
What would you say then is the difference between you and then the people that do listen to peers like that? So you don't listen to the people around you that perpetuate that toxicity, but what about the people that do? What would you think is different in your experience versus someone like that that would have led you to be this way?
Well, let's take it from the sociological angle of what demographics I am, how I was brought up, things like that. Because I was brought up in the sort of environment where it was drilled into me: you be nice to everyone, you respect everyone, treat everyone well, things like that. So if we go for the nature versus nurture argument, I was nurtured into that environment where respect was a very important thing, and where treating others like how you want to be treated was a key part of everyday life. And I'm not saying these people weren't brought up like that, because then again, every person is different, the paths they take through life are different. But you could argue that the majority of those people may have had a more traditionalist upbringing, where patriarchal gender roles were more important, and these traditional ideas of masculinity and femininity were more key, which allows them to be more receptive to the ideas that those are spouting on social media from Andrew Tate type figures and that lot. Very different upbringings. And secondly, the group I surround myself with and the group I found myself, the social circles I've drifted towards over the years, have leaned more progressive than traditionalist. And this is not something like I didn't purposely go into it when I was a good old 5 years old, but it's just how it happened to be. If you end up in the more popular social groups, I've spoken to some people who've ended up in the popular kid social groups that enjoy not enjoy, but have fallen into these sort of ideals, and they're saying, I completely disagree, but if leaving that social group would leave me without friends, it'd be social suicide. So it is both a factor of your upbringing and the social circle groups you've fallen into and the social circles that you're a part of that share these ideals. Because on your own, you might think differently. You might think, hang on, this is wrong. But you can't say that. You're trapped in this group, and if you leave, then you're on your own, and to you, that's worse.
Absolutely fascinating you saying that. I completely agree. There is such a massive social element to these things. People really underestimate the influence that just the social group that you're in and the quote unquote hierarchy of that social group, how much that can influence so much of your life. And going back to what you said about the nature versus nurture, and we saw in adolescence that, Jamie, a lot of people have been saying that, well, he didn't grow up in a horrible household. Like, how did he come like this? But if you really look at it under a microscope, you can see that, there are gender roles reaffirmed in his household, and that in tandem with the social groups that he is making online through social media, through his phones, in whatever form that may take, those in tandem create this bigger issue. And once again, it feeds back to, it's not a black and white problem, is it? It's, there's so many interlinked scenarios. So let's think about the parents listening. If there are any, I'm sure there are some, because, if I was a parent and I watched Adolescence, I probably would be terrified too, What is my child going to get into? What are they into? And there's a lot of fear at the moment, I think, going on. And I think hopefully these conversations can help soothe that fear. But as a young person, what would you say to parents? What advice would you give someone who's listening in and is worried about their child getting into things and doesn't really know how to start these conversations with them?
I want to make one thing clear first, which is your immediate response should not be to go through all their electronics, go through everything, and see if they're consuming this sort of stuff. Because in the moment, it feels like the right thing to do to monitor everything, see everything that they're doing, and monitor, okay, is this feeding into that ideology? And sure, you will know whether they are falling down that rabbit hole, but by that point, you will not be able to solve it because you have broken their trust. Because to a young person, their phone and their digital life is everything. And if you invade that, it's like if someone went through your diary or whatever, it is like a massive breach of trust. And that will get them to close off and they won't be receptive to anything you have to say because they are not even angry, but just in fear at that point that anything they say can and will be used against them. Instead of going for the very invasive approach, you need to go for a very respectful approach. Sit them down and be like, okay, what do you think of Andrew Tate? What sort of content are you consuming? Are you coming across this sort of stuff in your social groups? That is the first key step. The second key step is reflect on your own behaviour. Because as much as we would like to think we've done everything right, we've taught them to be respectful, we've taught them that, kindness is everything, but it's more than that. As you were saying, it's these values that we hold. And whether it's the progressive ideas, postmodernist ideals of gender roles, what are those? We don't do those in our household. Or whether you have a very traditionalist approach. It's about reflecting about the values you hold in everyday life and seeing whether that fits the narrative that these manosphere creators or whatever they're called are playing into. Because if they are playing into your ideals, then your child is going to be more susceptible at the end of the day. And that might be a bit harsh, but that's just the truth of the matter. And finally, you need to have these conversations more often. You need to create the environment where these conversations can happen. Because it's not about forcing on each other. It's not about, okay, what do you think? Are you doing this, that? It's about just mentioning at the dinner table, being like, oh, I saw this. What are your thoughts? And it's about making the environment welcoming rather than wanting them to close off. It's about talking and not shouting. It's about the simple things that makes the young person comfortable to speak. And there's one final bit, which is maybe to recognise that you might not want to be the person they speak to, because young people love their parents, right? I don't think anyone's saying that we have anything against them. But then again, they are our parents and they are a facet of our everyday lives. Like, I'm not going to go admit all my secrets to my mum because I'm going to have to see her every day after that, and some things could get a bit awkward. So I'm not going to say everything. And that's life. You can't avoid that. And I'm sure many parents recognise this too. But encourage them, if they can't speak to you as a parent, speak to their friend group, speak to teachers, speak to someone else, speak to someone. Because at the end of the day, silence is your enemy. Not talking will be your enemy over everything else. Because if young people let these thoughts fester alone in their head, they will fester without challenge, and that will become an echo chamber, and they will turn to the people who affirm those over everything else. They will turn to those content creators that say, yes, you are right, you are in the right, and you should not be challenged on this. That will be the key issue.
I loved that. A little boom, mic drop. But that is the truth, that they will be susceptible. You have to allow your young person to be their own person, allow them to have their own autonomy. And that can mean, not always listening to you all the time. And if they are, then that's not always a good thing. My mom, as great as she was, she was human, and part of that is to have flaws, and not everything that she told me to do was good for me. And you know, and I think if you are an adult or a parent listening in, and I'm going to feed back to Hadyn's first step, it's have that conversation, have that communication. You're worried about these things. Don't break their trust by going through their mobile phone. No, don't do that. Why would you do that? I've luckily never had that done to me, but I've heard horror stories.
You'd be shocked at how common it is. I mean, most of my friends have had that happen, and I'm just like, what on earth? Half the time, there's nothing to worry about either. It's done for no reason.
Mm. And then you just break that trust for nothing. And then how do you rebuild from that? And as well, like going back to the rebellion point, it's so much easier to rebel against someone who's broken your trust. But talking about conversation a little bit more, because there is one key big thing about this adolescence, I wouldn't say debate, but conversation, buzz, virality, whatever. It is emojis. It just always comes up. I see a lot of older people, sharing this is what an emoji really means. Make sure that you're decoding your young person's emojis. And I've not seen any of them talk to young people and go, yeah, no, that isn't right. So, Hadyn, what are your thoughts on the emojis in adolescence? Were they right? Were they wrong?
You lovely people home at home could not see that, but M could. That I just slouched in my chair and went, "We're on to this topic." I will be the first one to admit that I am not the most in tune about this matter because I am not part of the circles, the incel circles that would use such emojis. But I'm going to be entirely honest. I don't think that was entirely accurate. I'm sure there are some elements of accuracy here and there, and I'm sure some things are used to mean other things. But 99% of the time, when I see a photo posted by an adult talking about these, watch out for this language young people use to mean this, I'm like, oh, who has told you that? Because they've taken you down the garden path and led you straight up it. And half the time I wonder if they even spoke to a young person or dreamt it up. I don't deny that young people may use language that is unfamiliar to older people. God knows the year sevens in my school say things that I have to double check afterwards because language is evolving faster than ever, and in the age of the internet, words can change meaning from day to day. And that's the key thing. You will not be able to ever stay on top on every single word a young person uses unless you're there yourself to see it. So the key thing is not trying to decode whatever sneaky language that is, because half the time if I'm using an emoji, I'm using it quite literally and I'm not trying to mean anything of it. Just talk to your young person and see what it actually means. I mean, literally, that's what happened in the show. The emojis were a plot point that was revealed by a young person. So that is the key. You're only going to be able to understand it if you stop paying attention to random graphics on Facebook and start paying attention to the actual young people in your lives who will know what it means, hopefully.
It's fascinating that you said about language and language evolving, because a lot of people underestimate that emojis are language. They are a form of language. They're not just symbols that mean something like a roadside sign, right? Like the no entry sign is probably going to stay that way for years, but you know, there's some emojis that are so ambiguous that you're like, well, that's obviously going to have loads of different meanings, and it's always going to be personal too. You know, like you say, Hayden, and I'm in the same court as you. If I use an emoji, I'm not doing it for a code. I'm doing it to like go with what I'm saying. Um, or like I like the aesthetics of it. You know, if I put a horse or a snowflake in a social media post or a message, that doesn't mean I'm asking for drugs. Because I've seen that. It's like, oh, watch out, mum's on Facebook. These are the emojis you need to look out for drugs. And I find it really fascinating as well that they've done that because on one hand they're quote unquote educating um their peers, but if I was actually using those emojis for a code and saw people decode them, I would just use different emojis, surely, right? I would start evolving my language.
Yeah, I mean, given how popular and famous Adolescence was, even if the emojis were a code that I simply don't understand, they would have changed weeks ago by now.
Completely agree. Yeah. So I think the real solution to emojis, if they are important to you, if you watched Adolescence and your biggest takeaways was no emojis are the problem, emojis and phones, and it's like that's the tip of the iceberg. But if that is your takeaway, don't sit there snooping on Facebook trying to decode them. Just like Hayden was saying earlier, talk to your young people. Yes.
Don't sit on Facebook or Mumsnet. Mumsnet is my personal enemy, and I would like to make that known.
Noted for the podcast. Hayden is against Mumsnet. I now hope that we don't have Mumsnet against us. Although that would be fun. If anyone who is on Mumsnet is listening in and you want to be a guest and talk about this next time, let me know.
I will personally go up against them. I will put myself forward for that.
Okay, so we have an offering for a PP debate, and I'll let you know if that happens. I'm low key like, actually, that would be really interesting. Um, but I think you mentioning Mumsnet as well. And I will be wrapping up soon, but you just kind of put a flag in my brain because in a way it's quite ironic that, and you might disagree, but there's a culture of adults watching adolescents, watching a young man get radicalized by social media, and then turning to their echo chambers on the internet to then perpetuate communication. And of course, they're not exactly the same because one is radical and one's not. but it is quite interesting to see the parallels of the use of technology and community to perpetuate beliefs, positive or negative.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting on that front because I've actually done some snooping on Mumsnet because I was curious what they get up to on there, and I saw some regular posts being like, "Oh, can I get some advice on this or that?" And then you see some things that you would only expect on the darker steps of the internet. And I think it's interesting how any online community, even about the most innocent thing, can evolve into either this amazing utopia where we share information. Realistically, it's not going to be that, but let's just pretend for the sake of the example. Amazing utopia where we all share information and be happy, or the darker steps of the internet where no one's a big fan of going apart from people who are already there. So I think the key thing to be aware of, the key takeaway on the side of social media, not just generally, but on the side of social media, is that any online community can evolve and radicalize itself, maybe not radicalize, but echo chamber itself into this very specific set of ideals that they believe are right and without challenge. And that applies to anything. The internet can do a lot, good and bad. It can do good when it is used to share diverse perspectives from many groups of people, young people and parents, or whatever sort of groups you're choosing, whatever demographics you're looking at. And it's bad when you have one specific group of people all talking and agreeing and amplifying an idea that turns into something more ugly and more heinous than that. So, responsible internet regulation is not, let's ban phones. Interestingly enough, to drop into here, Youth Select Committee report, I didn't agree with everything in there, but I did agree with the fact that they said banning phones is not the right thing to do. That's an actual parliamentary report, and I do agree with that specific conclusion. Responsible internet regulation ensures that radical content is tackled. There's lots of debates on that from talk about liberty or whatever, but that's outside of the scope of this. But it's also ensuring that places don't become echo chambers and you actually allow and enable forums to prosper that allow for this more diverse discussion. That is the responsible way to go forward with the internet, not just let's kill it or regulate it to death.
So I think we have covered all the bases. I think we've tackled adolescence, just the two of us. We've put the whole world to right. All the problems are solved.
We've done it.
Hey! But I hope to whoever listening, we have at least inspired someone to at least communicate, reflect, or recognize using your words, because they are excellent. And I think you should patent the Hadyn's 4 steps: communication, reflection, space, and recognize. It's very good.
I'll look into it. I'll see if I can get it trademarked.
Lundy, watch this space. It'll be Hadyn's model of participation next. But hopefully, those listening or you listening have taken something from this, and it has at least given you some food for thought. But before we go, and I thank Hadyn for his excellent answers and time, Hadyn, are there any final thoughts that you want to share with us? Anything that is burning in your brain that you want to get out?
My final message to the wonderful folks at home is quite simple. Whenever an issue arises involving young people, the root of the problem is often the fact that young people are not involved in the discussion. That should be changed. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so, so much, Hadyn, for your time today and just yourself, really. I'm not even going to say insights or answers because it didn't really matter what you said. I just wanted to know what you thought, your voice, your opinions, no agenda, no message, just unfiltered youth voice. Because, well, we shouldn't be suppressing honest and authentic youth voice. We should be enabling it, even if they are on a vendetta against Mumsnet. So thank you so much, Hadyn, and thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. You have all been wonderful, and we will hopefully see you in the next podcast. Take care. Bye.